These have angles, serrations. Look at the triangle now, it's completely different. It's not in the center of the rug, it's all across the rug, still influenced by the Spanish. And so they call this the variant chief's blanket. And you see variant chief's blanket. I have one that has a rattlesnake in it. So what we're talking about now is because colors are coming in, yarn is becoming commercialized, and you're seeing dye colors coming in. All of a sudden, we see Indians exploring a new form of artwork, and they're creating a variation. So during the classical period, we see blankets look like this. Then came what was called the transitional period. And when we enter the transitional period, what is interesting about the transitional period is it starts about 1865 and it only lasts for about 30 years. Here you're looking at way back in the 1600s, all the way to 1865, the classical period is alive and well. All utilitarian, all blankets. Now the transitional period. What changed the transitional period? We have the Santa Fe Trail coming in, we have the railroads coming in, and so now access to yarn is a lot more available, and we start with the dyes. This blanket is now one of the very first transitional blankets. It is all natural wool, all hand woven, but they now have dyes, and look at the colors. Now what is so beautiful about the transition period is that for the first time, this blanket still has the diamond pattern in it. But look at the way the colors pop out at you in your eyes. They call that the eye dazzler. Eye dazzlers were so beautiful because the eye dazzler blanket was created not out of Spanish influence. This is one of the few blankets that was completely created by the Native American. No influence from traders, no influence from anybody else. This was their own concept of utilizing colors for the first time, and they created these eye dazzlers. And what was so beautiful about it is this is only a 30-year period. And they didn't make a lot of eye dazzlers in that short period of time. So these old eye dazzler blankets, being as beautiful as they were beautiful only to the Navajos. To other people, they didn't like the colors. Remember Monet back in Europe when he first started with the bright colors on canvas? Nobody liked them. Today, I'd like to have 4 or 5 pieces of his artwork. Well, this is the art of the Navajo Nation when they created this eye dazzler. Now the next blanket comes from the same period, it comes from the Rio Grande, but take a look at it. The reason this blanket I put it here was for several reasons. Number one, we know it's made in 2 parts that you've already discovered, and we already know it's a Spanish loom because it is a Spanish blanket. Why did I put it here? We know that it was woven by an Indian, a Native American. The Native American wove this blanket, and there's a lot of reasons we know that. It's such a beautiful history here because now you still see the serrated type diamond in the center, which is Spanish influence. We have Jamaya, which is a name we're researching now, and we did trace somebody in the Rio Grande area with that name, so we're still investigating that. But the reason I know it's made by Native American, you have to understand, all the way now to 1865, some Native Americans were still enslaved by the Spanish. And there are 8 to 10 blankets that are called slave blankets. In other words, they were forced into slavery to make their blankets even all the way up to 1865. We know this is an 1865 rug because for the first time we're looking at an entirely commercial yarn. Commercial yarn, you have to understand, is we now have the trains coming. We now have the Santa Fe Trail in place. And with the Santa Fe Trail comes commercial yarn made by manufacturers. But we also have that manufacturing yarn has tremendous colors. You can now have blues, greens, yellows, pinks, orange, violet color. Any color you want, you can buy. For the Native American, that was an expensive thing. So this particular yarn comes from Pennsylvania, Germantown, Pennsylvania. It's called Germantown yarn. So we know it's 1865 because that's when the yarn started to come into play in the Rio Grande area. But we know it was made by the Indians because you see these little if you see them very closely, you can see these little arrow lines in here. Those lines are called lazy lines. Bad term. Aren't lazy at all. Those are yarn lines. This is where they start yarning. So they get to a point and they work their way down and they go to another point. So there's a line there because this is where they stop and where they start. We know it was not a Navajo that did this. This had to be either a Hopi, probably a Hopi, because Hopis always had their lazy lines very in order. If there was one on the right, there's one on the left. And Navajo's lazy lines are wherever they want. So you'll find them in the corner, in the middle, the side. There's no symmetrical use. This has all got symmetry. This one, this one, this one, this one. Every place you see a lazy line, it's symmetrical. So we know this blanket was made in around the 1860s. We know that it was a Spanish loom. It was done in a Spanish, probably ranchero. And we know a Native American made the blanket, and that Native American was probably Hopi. Which, you know, great story. We don't know if it's a slave blanket, because you see they had servants at that time. So this could be a servant that did this work for somebody on the ranch, or it could be a slave blanket. More than likely it was done by a servant. If it was a slave blanket, it'd be worth a fortune. But because there's only 8 to 10 in existence. When the commercial yarn comes up, the eye dazzler, take a look at this blanket. This is a pure eye dazzler created blanket. This is, we know the time frame again because it's Germantown yarn in Germantown, Pennsylvania. We know it's in the 1880s, but it is all those colors popping up. Compared to the classical period, now you're looking at the transitional period. And in the transitional period, the Indians, for the first time, the Native Americans had all the colors they wanted, all the rainbows. And so they created the eye dazzler, and this is their own creation. There is no influence by Spanish. You don't see triangles. All gone, all disappeared. This was their own type of creation. But the sad part of all that was it wasn't commercial. It wasn't. This is a child's wearing blanket worn by probably a Native American. They did very little selling and trading in these blankets.